Well, hello and welcome to this XpoNorth session on publishing trends. My name is Peter Urpeth. I'm XpoNorth's specialist advisor for the writing and publishing sector in the Highlands and Islands. Full details of our work, our year-round programme of support for the creative industries is at our website, XpoNorth.co.uk. And really pleased to be doing this event today, which is the first of three events kind of in a row, which are interconnected. And to have two fantastic guests with us today, Lena Langley and Robbie Guillory, two of the newest agents, I think, literary agents in Scotland, which is really interesting and important development. This is the first of three events, as I say, linked to XpoNorth's Tweet Pitch event, which takes place on the 21st of January. And these events stand alone, but they're also by way of kind of preparation for that, for any writers who wish to participate in that activity in January. So today we are publishing trends, and then on the 7th of January we have a session with the agent Jenny Brown and the author Alison Belsham on how to pitch, not just tweet pitches but pitching in general. So that too, you can find details at our website XpoNorth.co.uk, and full details of the tweet pitch, its rules and regulations, how you go about doing that can be found there as well. I think today as well, on all three of these events, are really part of I think a real celebration that we like to hold every year of writing and publishing in Scotland. And the fact that we've got two relatively new agents and agencies today in these sessions, I think, is an indication of the kind of core strength of that scene. And the tweet pitch, I think, is that kind of annual celebration of everything that's great about Scottish writing and its publishing sector. Now, today, what I'd like to do is we'll, first of all, Robbie and Lena will give a presentation about their agency and about their own work and the kinds of things that they represent. There'll be about 10 minutes each. And then after that, we'll go into a Q&A session, and you're very welcome to submit questions to that. Please use the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of the screen, bottom right hand side as you look at the screen. So, and pop your questions in there rather than in the chat section, and then I can pick those up and we'll and put those to our panelists today. So there was not a very sophisticated way of deciding who goes first, but we do have a structure from today. First thing I'd like to do is to bring to the screen Robbie, who's going to introduce his new agency, the Underline agency.
Hello. Yeah. My Zoom keeps coming on board. So can I just check that everyone is hearing this okay?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hearing just fine.
Yeah, that's fine. All right then. I will try and share my screen. Sorry about this.
No problems. Whilst you're just setting that up, I'll just say that actually that today's event is being recorded, so it will be available shortly online, but also the things that we're saying and doing will also obviously be in that context of it being a recorded event.
Right, let's see if this works a bit better. Sure. So yeah, we go. There, right, we're going. So yes, hello everyone. I am Robbie Guillory. I'm from the Underline literary agency. We are a very new agency. We just started in November, on the 2nd of November, and I say we, but at the moment it is just me, hiding under the umbrella of a bigger company, just waiting for others to join me eventually, maybe. We represent a wide range of commercial and literary fiction, as well as a bit of narrative nonfiction. There's pretty much, because Our list is quite small at the moment, but beautifully formed. We are looking to sort of deal with a number of different genres and not have too many competing titles, competing authors on our list. Based in Glasgow, but selling around the world with sales recently in America, and hopefully some nice translation ones lined up for the new year. Also selling into film and TV as well. You've got my Twitter handles on the right there and my website address. I'll show you some of the books that we've got coming out soon. So Dead Man's Grave, Neil Lancaster, this came out in September in hardback to great acclaim, and the paperback is coming out on the 1st of January. Very excited about it, got some big news, but I can't share it yet. That's a crime police procedural. And then Face by Joma West, this is coming out in August, and this is a sort of near future speculative novel written before the pandemic, but to do with a culture where people no longer touch. It's all about your sort of online profile, that is your face, and what that does to you in terms of sort of how you view the world and other people, and whether you lose connection, that vital physical connection that we need. The Golden Acre by Philip Miller, this is also coming out next year in June, I believe. And this is a crime thriller, but set in the art world of Edinburgh, and it features a journalist, Shona, as the lead character, trying to work out if a famous painting by Charles Redding Mackintosh is real or not. And then last but not least, we've got A Wartime Secret by Helen Yendall. This is coming out in January as well. And this is a historical novel set during World War II, where Maggie, a young woman from the East End of London, gets a job working for a bank that's been evacuated to a stately home in the Cotswolds, based on a real story. And while she's there, she's trying to find her sister who's been evacuated, and find out news about her mother, who's German and has been incarcerated for the duration of the war on the Isle of Man, which happened to many German nationals living in the UK. So very excited about those. And as you can see, there's sort of a bit of quite a range there, from the sort of the standard crime and thriller through to sort of science fiction, a sort of literary thriller, and a historical romance. So what I'm looking for at the agency, I just need to move my face out of the way. So with fiction, I'm looking for crime and thrillers, but with unusual protagonists and less sort of blue light crime, so less police in charge and more sort of other people discovering crime. I'm also looking for contemporary fiction with a lot of heart, that's about the bonds of friendship. And I guess that is sort of connected to my next one, which is sort of the getting the band back together. This can be sort of across all genres, really, from crime and thrillers to contemporary stories. I'm really interested in, and I think probably this is going to come out later when we talk about the pandemic and the results of the pandemic, but I'm really interested in like friendship bonds and rediscovering friendships. But I'm also looking for Gothic novels, historical or modern. I like them dark, I like them sinister, I like lots of mist. They've got to be full of atmosphere, hence the mist. And I'm also looking for more fantastical or sort of science fiction writing, but it's got to have a really strong hook to break through at the moment. I think we'll probably be talking about how hooky things need to be later as well. On nonfiction, I'm interested in nature nonfiction, which is inclusive rather than escapist. And what does that mean? That means it's got to make sense to somebody who lives in cities. I want nonfiction that people can read who don't have access to miles and miles of hedgerow or forest, and that they can use that book to then sort of enrich their own lives rather than living through the enrichments of other people. And niche specialisms writ large. So that's people who do extraordinary things that you might not have heard of, who are able to translate that and make it interesting to a wider readership. Yeah, so that is me.
Great, and thanks very much, Robbie. I'll just say that any questions we'll take after the presentation rather than asking during the presentation. So I'd like to hand over to Lena.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's see how I manage with sharing the screen and getting this up. Yeah, that I think is working. Yes. Okay, so it was really interesting to hear a bit more about Robbie's exciting new agency. And also it's interesting that I think we are looking for quite similar things. And so that might partly be that we're just interested in similar things, but it might also be speaking to trends, which is obviously interesting in this discussion, because a lot of things that Robbie is talking about is stuff that I love as well. So, okay. Right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the North as an agency, and then like Robbie, I'll talk a little bit about books that I represent and kind of what I'm looking for in the future. Okay, so start off, let me see if I can move all of this side panel. Okay, so the agency, the North Literary Agency, was founded in 2017 by a group of agents with many years of agenting experience, but we've also got experience as booksellers, publishers, and even as published authors. I joined in 2020, but I come from, I started working as an agent in 2018, I think, and before that I was in Scottish publishing, working at publishers like Canongate and Black and White. We've got a global reach. We work with a lot of co-agents across the world. I think we've got about split into like 14 or 15 territories, and they're basically agents that work on our behalf in their domestic market where they've got specialism, so they can pitch directly at publishers in a way that we couldn't really do worldwide. But we're very much proudly Northern. There's 5 agents. We're based in Northumberland, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. I wonder, well, I like to think that I'm especially Northern because I am based in Edinburgh and I'm also Swedish, so I must be one of the most kind of Northern literary agents working in UK publishing. Don't know if there's any Icelandic ones working from the UK. That would be interesting. And yeah, kind of like Robbie, we represent any writing we feel passionate about. That's kind of number one when it comes to finding an agent that's a good match with your writing. They need to really feel passionate about it and obviously also think that they can sell it. So we do literary stuff, commercial, book club, crime thrillers, rom-coms, speculative. I also do young adult and middle grade, as do some of my other co-agents or fellow agents. There's also a lot of biography, sports, and popular science. I don't do too much nonfiction, although I do want to move into that a bit more. You can see more about our agents and what we're all looking for at our website, thenorthlitagency.com/agents. I can very briefly just kind of give some headline terms of what everyone's looking for based on my own perception. I'm not sure if they would agree. At the top there, the mask is Kevin, and he is very passionate about nonfiction. He does a lot of music books, and he has some really kind of big musicians on his list, like Johnny Rotten and Pete Doherty, and lots of really cool people. His author Peter Ross just won the Saltire Award for his nonfiction book, Tomb with a View. So that's very exciting. And then we've got Julie. She does a lot of really cool literary speculative things. She has a few really good thriller authors, so I think are going to be really big next year. And yeah, also commercial women's fiction. And then we've got Alan, who is a published crime author, crime editor, and who also is really drawn to crime in what he represents. So lots of great crime writing handled by him. Then it's me. I'll talk more about me in a minute. And then we've got Stan, who does a lot of sports, nonfiction books, and lots of really big kind of best-selling commercial fiction. He's had 2 huge books this year called The Dark by Emma Houghton and The Stranger by Simon Conway, who seems to be on all those kind of roundups of best crime books of the year. So that's very exciting. And okay, let me see if I can get to the next slide. Yes, okay, so here we've got some of my books. And this is a mixture of books recently published or due to be published. I've tried to loosely do it by kind of age and genre here, just for ease. So first we've got Rebel Skies, which is a kind of teen/YA fantasy. It's inspired by Japanese history and mythology. And that's a great example of something that I'm interested in, just kind of history and mythology in magical realism, or just inspiring any stories kind of from across the world. It's very interesting to me. And then we've got some Scottish YA, contemporary YA with Lily's Just Fine, YA crossover thrillers. So that's books that should be of interest both to kind of teens and adults. That's what crossover means. And they're interesting if we start talking about TikTok potentially later, that kind of area of the market. Then I've got some police procedurals from Sharon Dempsey, which is a Belfast-based crime series. And then we're moving into something else that I think is big at the moment, which is cozy crime. 12 Motives for Murder by Fiona Sherlock is an interesting book to potentially discuss as well, because that is an audio-led publication. So that is, well, it's interesting in how the changing landscape of how we consume books directly affects publishing, because that was actually the publisher who specifically wanted a book told that would work with a big audio cast. So that's completely done in interviews. It's got, I think, 12 different narrators. But interestingly, it's also selling well as a paperback, even though it's kind of scripted and meant to be listened to as a kind of immersive story. And then we've got some historical fiction, historical crime, historical romance, lovely escapist reads, and then moving down to contemporary romance and rom-coms with Bookshop Christmas, The Dating Game. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm representing and have sold recently. Lots of kind of escapism and kind of feel-good books, I'd say. And then looking to the future and what I'm looking for. Definitely more Northern voices, and I'm not just saying that because we're doing an XpoNorth event, but because I think it's important, and I think we're seeing more appetite for it as well. And also just more diversity in general in kind of all its shapes and forms. Looking at middle grade, adventure stories, magical realism, fantasy, always looking for something that really transports me and that's fun and heartwarming. Something very specific I'm looking for is a winter story. So if you're writing a middle grade that's either set in winter as a backdrop or where winter is an important part of the plot, I would love to see that. That's based on a specific request from a publisher. YA, fantasy, romance. I feel like there's been a lot of issue-driven YA in the past, and now I feel like we want uplifting and fluffy romances. And yeah, I'd love to see some fresh takes on good tropes like enemies to lovers or reluctant royalties or any of those good ones. Adult fiction, like Robbie, love Gothic fiction. I think editors love it too, readers love it too, so that's a great thing to be writing. Horror, I haven't had on my wish list before, but I am dipping my foot into it because editors are asking for it, and because I think it's an extension of kind of speculative and also Gothic, something that gives us a sense of unease. Everyone's always looking for really high concept books, regardless of genre. I am too. Similar book club, those kind of big controversial topics, really hot at the moment. And then, yeah, anything that's kind of upmarket or accessible literary, I'm still interested in, and uplifting things. And yeah, as I said, I really enjoy things that have a kind of a setting or a myth, like history, that feeds into the books. So anything kind of Northern or Scandinavian, I would love to see. And as always, hook and concept is super important. When it comes to more speculative stuff like sci-fi fantasy, I'd love a grounded sci-fi, maybe something near future, or even a really big epic fantasy to really get your teeth into. But regardless of the genre, I love things that kind of feel good, love stories, feminism, identity, parenthood, those kind of things. And then when it comes to nonfiction, narrative, nonfiction, and possibly also cooking, baking books if someone has a really interesting concept. It can't just be great recipes, it has to have a kind of idea behind it, I'd say. And yeah, I think that's it from me. I should see if I can turn the share screen off, which I cannot. Where is it there? Stop share. Okay. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Robbie and Lena. So much interesting stuff there. Can I? I'll just start the Q&A. Just to kick it off, I'd like to ask a question about pretty much the day and age we live in, which is the impact of the pandemic and COVID, specifically really as a subject matter, or as a type of subject within the scene. Maybe it is there, but I haven't seen the great kind of COVID novel. What are you guys seeing on the ground as agents in that regard?
I think it's a really interesting one. It's not something that I'm massively interested in. Sort of the isolation of COVID, I think. There's been a few books that have come out, though their names have just escaped me. One of them's got a beautiful cover that's sort of all coppery. What's it called? It's in hardback. It will come back to me. But there are some novels that are coming out. It's something that I've been shying away from a bit. I've got a crime novel that's on submission at the moment that's set sort of probably a year ahead from now or something like that. So there are face masks about, but it's very much something that has happened. I am sort of expecting, now that we know how long it's lasted and how long it's sort of going to last, the ramifications, I'm expecting it to exist in some form, you know, in our writing, even if it's just because it's part of our in contemporary writing anyway. And in nonfiction, I know this because I took a nonfiction book about COVID to auction last year. There are a lot of nonfiction books about COVID by all the big voices of the last sort of 24 months that are going to be coming out probably next year. Now that the public inquiry is starting, I think we're going to start to see a lot of nonfiction about it.
Yeah, I'd probably echo what Robbie said. I mean, it's interesting with trends and how these things feed into it, because absolutely kind of last year we saw editors emailing agents and saying, I want a COVID romance book. And there's this thing called, editors sometimes have an IP project, which is an intellectual property project, where they have an idea for a book that they want to market or bring to the market. So they will kind of try and match up their idea with the right writer. So some of those books will actually have been that the publisher sees an opportunity and says, we're wanting to move quickly. Can someone write this? This is roughly what we want to happen. So definitely seen some of those books coming out. But interestingly, I feel like in meetings with editors, we, and including myself in it, do not really have the desire to read about COVID yet. I think we're still living through it. I think people are finding it hard. So I think a lot of people want escapism from books. So even though it can be a great concept, you know, it's a locked room thriller or romance or something because it's forcing you to behave in a certain way, I think it's a bit too soon. I think in like 30 years time, people will talk about this time as a really interesting period where things can happen. But I think it's too fresh still. And I feel like we get too much of it in the news. And I don't really want it when I'm trying to unwind with a great read. So yeah, I'm not actively looking for anything that's too COVID specific.
I mean, I think it's very interesting. And Robbie, you said something that I think is really interesting, which is that your interest in kind of non-fiction nature writing and so on. Have you noticed? Has that market kind of changed? Has the readership changed with a kind of pandemic link, in that lots of people who never used to think about walking around the local neighborhood spent most of a year doing that? And I know there's been something of a reaction to that in terms of things like YouTube channels and so on, that there's been a growing market for that. Are we seeing that? Is there a kind of a new emerging audience for that kind of urban setting, or for the, just for a kind of growth in interest in nature and local travel type books?
Yeah, I think it hasn't hit the market really yet, but I think that there is a desire for it. I think there is a readership for it, and as you say, there were so many Instagram accounts and YouTube accounts and things like that really sprung up over the pandemic, of people experiencing their local area in totally new ways. And I was a bit of a geek at uni, and there was quite a few people talking about psychogeography and things like that, which is all about sort of the small things missed in built up spaces. And certainly I know somebody's writing a book on sort of the common weeds that you find like in your pavements, and sort of, growing through the cracks of the lawn, that the cracks of our cities that the council haven't managed to spray down.
Brilliant.
And I think there's something really wonderful about that. It's sort of, yeah, exactly. I think we're going to see a lot more of it, and I think it will be less sort of intrepid exploring of. I think that there still will be a readership of intrepid exploring, and people walking memoirs of going through Snowdonia. But I think we're going to start to see a lot more interest in urban nature, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, certainly on YouTube, that's been a major, as you mentioned, things like the sort of psychogeography and so on, But it also raises the question, something, Lena, you mentioned, which is the kind of connections with things like TikTok, which is obviously massive in its own right. Are you seeing a kind of the development of a stream of books coming out of that kind of platform, that the authors are themselves those people? Now, I don't think it's just influencers or people with large accounts, but how's that kind of link working now?
Yeah, I think TikTok is so interesting, and especially if I'm thinking about like the area of TikTok that's called BookTok, which is just where people who are interested in books can really kind of get geeky, and it's great, and it's such a positive thing to have happened to the industry, because it's just another way of getting books out there, and kind of organic marketing, or quite often also paid for. But it's we've had book bloggers and YouTubers for years, but I feel like this is a new fresh thing, and it's really interesting because it is really shaping the market. And from my discussions with editors, it is also something at the back of their mind when they're acquiring. So the great thing about BookTok is that we don't really know what it's going to do, but if books take off there, they take off in a really big way. And there's different things you do with books, and they go viral. So there'll be anything where you can create content around the book. So there's a lot of here are my best reads and things like that. But it's interesting because you're seeing a lot of the same books, and it's just everyone kind of wants to read what everyone else is reading. So if you get to be one of those books, amazing things happen, but it's really difficult to crack it, of course. But speaking to editors, it is shaping how they acquire, because there's certain types of books that would work better on BookTok. And this is obviously a small area of publishing. I'm in no way saying that all publishers are thinking about this. This would be more kind of genre and younger readership. So this would be like YA and fantasy and kind of speculative things. So romance works really well. High big emotions work really well. There's like one of these viral videos you can do is basically you filming yourself when you're reading the end of a set number of books or specific books that are very emotional. So there's lots of just videos of teenagers crying, and anything that can create content like that book. What's it called? Cain's Jawbone. Do you know which book I'm talking about?
Yes.
It's published by Unbound, and that's like a book that was published in the 1930s or something. So it's out of copyright, and it's basically a crime novel where all the pages are jumbled. So you're encouraged to cut all the pages out of the book and try to put them in the right order and solve the crime. And because that's like great content, you get these BookTokers like filming their walls and like how they're doing the clues, so they get to be the detectives. And it's just such an interesting way of creating content for them and for people to want to get in on the hype, that book has then just gone to reprint, and it's doing amazingly well. So there's so much like exciting little, it feels like a kind of subculture of publishing and reading, and yeah, it can have great effects, and I think it's very exciting.
Great. Just a few questions that have been submitted by those who have joined us. First of all, one for Robbie. Do you have any plans in expanding your agency to children's of YA in the future? Talking of TikTok.
That's a good job. That's a very good question. I probably no, probably not. I just don't think I've got the time to spend in becoming an expert in that area. And definitely the best thing is to find somebody who knows that market better. Yeah, it's not one for me. I really enjoy. I think what I really enjoy about YA is how cross-genre it is, and I'm sort of hoping that we're going to start to see, as YA readers are growing up and entering their 30s, quite a few of them, I think, sort of started about 15 years ago, didn't it? That we're going to start to see, hopefully, a real breakdown in genre in the adult market. That would be lovely, and less sort of stigma attached to genres that aren't fancy enough or literary enough.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, because one of the things about the growth of kind of like the whole digital book scene was how much it actually seemed to cement the distinctions between genres, because certain genres sold very well in things like Kindle. It's interesting to think that actually might be a rebound to that now. That maybe that's a signal of the kind of maturing of a particular new type of market, is that it contains a greater diversity of content than just what was the tried and tested means of a digital only or principally digital book. So
do you think I'm right in that, Lena? Does YA is YA the destroyer of genre, or are genres just appearing within YA?
I really like your idea of it opening up in genres. I hadn't even thought about that before, but I love that, because I think if you have a fantasy book or if you have a crime book in adult fiction, you have very different lists of editors that you send that to at different publishers. Whereas you're right, if you're selling a YA book, it's the same editors who would read across genre. And yeah, if you start them off across genres when they're younger, you might well go into a broader spectrum when you're older, which I think is great. I'm very happy to just say something about YA, because I do represent YA and a little bit of middle grade, and I love reading YA. I think it's a great area of the market, and I also think that people like me are part of the target audience, because it's not only for teenagers, it's often for people in their 20s and 30s as well. And I used to work at a publisher who had a YA imprint, and I kind of thought when I was becoming an agent that I would be a YA agent, just because I loved YA a lot. But it is a really tricky area to sell books in, so that's why there's quite a lot of people who maybe wouldn't do YA unless it's a special interest, and that's there's so many reasons for this, and that could be a whole panel discussion in its own right. But a lot of it is to do with kind of big names already being established in a small market. A lot of it has to do with buy-ins from America with big titles there. And then I think also as an industry, we're not that good at marketing to teenagers. We're good with middle grade and younger because that's basically marketing to the parents, and adult, you're marketing to readers. But teenagers are tricky. And again, that's kind of where things like BookTok is interesting, because maybe this is a way to reach younger readers in a way we haven't before. So yeah, that's just me jumping in to kind of talk about something that I'm very interested in.
Just related to that, two questions have been asked here. First of all, I've had a couple of questions about short stories. This is a question that comes up quite often in these sorts of forums, and over the years, there's things have changed and moved a little bit. Where are we at the moment in terms of short story collections?
I feel like, sorry, Lena, do you want to go first?
I think you will have more interesting things to say about this, because I think broadly or quickly, what I think is I read more short stories than I ever have during the lockdowns, and we switched from books to short stories in my book club because they were small and accessible. So I am sure they might be a bit there might be a resurgence of short stories. I wouldn't represent any, because kind of like Robbie feels about YA, I don't think I have enough knowledge there, and I don't know if I would go down to really build my network amongst editors who would acquire it. I don't think I could sell a short story collection, but maybe Robbie has something else to say about that.
So I yeah, I didn't really. I love short stories. I love short story collections. I love the way that you can sort of theme them together, or put a short story collection together in so many different ways. And I've edited quite a few short story collections in the past, and I've got one author, Catalina Watt, who I've just recently taken on, who's got a fantastic collection of short stories inspired by Filipino mythology that I'm really excited about sending out to editors next year. But it is a really tricky market. This resurgence in short story sort of consuming has been expected for decades now, and it's just not happening. And it's a shame. And because of that, there isn't a huge amount of money in it. And sadly, agents, though we're representing books that we love, we also have to know where our 15% is coming from. And when you're not going to make much from a short story collection, the amount of work that you're putting into what you're getting out is sometimes just not viable. That's horrible and mercenary. And this is the weird thing about our industry, is that we connect sort of the art of writing to the cold, hard, mercenary art of book selling. In America, short story collections do really well, and have done for ages. I don't know why we haven't managed to crack it in this country yet, but maybe we will with Catalina's collection. And this is me sort of putting my toe in the water, I suppose, and sort of seeing, can I make it work? This is a really high concept book. Maybe that will help it. I think it will. I think it's gonna sell, but I'm gonna be really choosy about them. Yeah. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, it's so interesting that there is some sort of movement on that, because I know a few years ago it was just like a kind of straight no. I mean, there's always exceptions, but there does seem to be some sort of movement in that particular direction. Another question's asked here, and this could occupy the rest of the afternoon on its own. Very interested to hear your opinions on the fine line between Gothic and horror. So where are we up to in these kinds of things at the moment?
Tricky. I think Gothic could be horror, but I think horror is a bit broader, because horror could be more within the kind of sci-fi fantasy realm. I think horror is more of a emotion rather than a genre, isn't it? So it can be quite a loosely defined genre.
A bit of a subgenre, isn't it? It's sort of,
yeah,
Gothic horror or sci-fi horror, or
yeah. So I think there's a lot of books that you could say, oh, but things that happen here are scary or horrific, isn't this horror? But quite often, like a psychological thriller that's also quite creepy, I think in publishing we would still classify as a psychological thriller, whereas a horror has to have something which a kind of increasing sense of unease, and quite often something a bit more unexplained, doesn't need to be tidied up in the end, maybe in the same way as most other genres, and can quite often have a fantastical element in you know, something coming alive that shouldn't be alive, or things like that. I think is that roughly how you see it, Robbie?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I find it so hard. As soon as somebody asks me to define a genre, I find it I clam up completely. One of the best books I read this year was a thriller called The Last House on Needless Street, and that for me is a horror. It's a horror through and through. It's just, but it's also surprising and wonderful and beautiful. And I think everyone should read it. It was really, really good. But was it also quite Gothic? I mean, Gothic's got tropes, right? You've got to have the house, and you know, it's generally led by a woman. I think, but whereas horror can be anything that's going to give your spine a bit of a tingle. So yeah, I'm not sure I could answer. I'm not sure I could answer.
But I also think as writers, you shouldn't need to worry too much about that. Like if the question comes from someone who's about to query and they're wondering, should I call this horror or should I call this Gothic? Then I think don't worry about it too much. It's good if you got a general idea of what you're writing, but really can't, you know, it's the agent's job of being the professional. You know, we are the one who have to sell it to the editors. So if you called your book a genre and we think it's actually something slightly different, you know, we will, you know, it's our expertise and we need to be the professionals there. So don't worry too much if you happen to not get it 100%.
Certainly looking forward at the sort of the Twitter pitch next month. You know, the pitch is more important to me than the genre. You know, I'm reading sort of, I read these tweets every year. There's some that just make me go, oh yes, I want to read that. And you know, the genre, as we said, we both represent quite widely, and we're looking for the books that we fall in love with. So as long as the pitch is working, it doesn't really matter what the genre is.
No. If you had the hashtag Gothic, hashtag horror on the same tweet, I would still be interested in that.
Yeah. It's one of the things we'll be covering, actually, the ins and outs of actually making a good pitch on that event on the 7th of January, and people can sign up for that via the XpoNorth page. So if you want to work on that, then I would recommend that session with Jenny and Jenny Brown and Alison Belsham. Just go back to the questions here, just related, or maybe not, to the issue of kind of shorter fiction. There's a question there. A couple of people have asked about novellas. Something very specific here as well. Person says they've written a crime novel and have also edited right down to 320, from 320 to 120 page mark, and feel it works much better. What's the kind of cutoff in these kinds of things now? Where are we with the novella?
Is a novella anything that's under 40,000 words, is it, or 30,000?
It's 40.
Yeah,
but then there's this blurry sort of bit between 40 and 70,000 words that is sort of neither too short nor too long.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a bit lately because I just signed a brilliant author who's written a kind of speculative, grounded sci-fi thing, and it was, I think, 55,000 words when I first read it, and it did make me worry a little bit that it's slightly short. But it was just so well paced, and I didn't want to add padding. So I mean, if Russell thinks his book is better for it, I mean, we think in word count rather than page numbers. 120 pages, you know, that depends on if there's double spacing and things like that. So it's difficult to say how long that is. Certainly wouldn't add padding for padding's sake, but it might well be some themes there to explore, or a scene that's needed here or there. That might take it up to, I think, a kind of standard. You'd kind of expect a general fiction or crime, because this is crime, to be kind of anything between 70,000 to 90,000 words, roughly, kind of plus minus 10%.
And there are so few publishers who will take on novellas. You know, novellas is a really niche market, and I think I've got some authors who are sort of selling their own novellas because it doesn't come under our agreement. So yeah, what was the question? Thoughts on publishing novellas, especially crime? Yes, it's a very niche subject, but then crime is also the largest genre. So you're sort of marrying the largest genre with a niche format. But yeah.
Yeah, I've actually worked at a publisher who published a book that I think was kind of just over 40,000 words, so it was maybe like 50,000 words, and the writing was brilliant. Didn't want to pad it out in any way, but also felt that it wasn't quite what like booksellers and readers were expecting. But I think with some clever typesetting and really nice margins and some kind of illustrations on a few pages, they kind of got it up to a book that looked kind of normal sized, and I think I mean, I'm not sure if we should share the insights or behind the scenes of publishing, but I think part of that is also because you need to get your profit and loss sheet to work. So they still needed to sell the book at roughly the same price as they would a book that would have been 70 to 80,000 words. So to be able to have that kind of $8.99 price point, they kind of needed it to feel substantial. And to be honest, I don't think that was cheating, because they made the book a beautiful object with really nice margins and things like that. But I know that that was a discussion in-house, and that's just because readers and booksellers have certain expectations. Yeah, so that's an interesting part of publishing, perhaps.
Just whilst we're mentioning crime, June asks, would you classify a crime novel involving police always as being a police procedural? For example, the early Rebus novels.
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so, because there's so many different ways you can approach a crime. And also, it wouldn't be too bogged down in genres and subgenres. You know, know kind of what the expectations are for your genre, work it to your advantage in a refreshing way. And yeah, don't worry too much about subgenres.
Whilst we're on crime, I suppose, and we're doing a trends panel, so we should maybe talk about some trends yeah, that we've noticed. And I mentioned in my sort of wish list that I'm not really looking for the blue light sort of detective or police procedural crime thrillers, crime novels. And that's because I'm finding them really hard to sell at the moment. There's a lot of established names out there. I guess it's a bit like the YA problem. There's established names out there, especially in sort of tartan noir. And I think it requires authors to be playing with the genre a bit and being a bit more experimental with sort of who the protagonist is. Yeah, and also sort of where you're setting it as well. It feels like urban-based crime, especially if it's based in London, but often if it's based in, you know, Glasgow or Edinburgh, isn't quite as popular at the moment as sort of rural crime or crime novels that are taking part in parts of the country that we don't usually visit in our writing.
Yeah, I would very much agree. I've been speaking to other agents and editors about this as well. And you can absolutely write a brilliant police procedural, especially if you do it in a fresh voice and maybe representing underrepresented voices or things. But what seems to be a trend in crime now is partly the resurgence in cozy crime because of people like Richard Osman and also The Appeal and books like that. But I think, as Robbie says, the setting is now almost character, and that's not, you know, that's definitely been done in years before, but I think that's a really big trend now. You've got things like Lucy Foley's Hunting Party, where it's very important that they're set up in the Highlands and that it's very isolated. I mentioned the book The Dark, which is my colleague Stan's books, author's book, which is set in Antarctica, and the setting is very, very important. We've got Francine Toon's Pine, which is also up in the Highlands, and it becomes part of the story. So yeah, kind of locked room thrillers, but the room is a whole setting or area. It's something that we're seeing a lot of, and still, strong concepts, clever hooks, but not as much kind of ridiculous twists as I think we were kind of seeing a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
They've kind of been done now, and we're kind of expecting them now.
I think that's hurting the sort of psychological thriller market as well a bit, because this was the fastest growing sort of thrillers subgenre, wasn't it? Psychological thrillers, and I think that now a lot it's quite tapped out, and the concept has to be really strong for it to cut through.
Both of you actually mentioned SF. What's the kind of trend there that you're noticing?
More lighthearted, actually, and again, it's possibly because I've been discussing TikTok and BookTok with editors, but definitely, big epic fantasies are still doing well. It's interesting because YA can be published as SFF, so you can send YA books to children's editors, but also to genre specialist editors under imprints. So there's like epic fantasy, romance, more lighthearted, and a bit more sense of fun, I think. But also, it's a lot of the SFF editors are asking for horror. So clever concepts and things like that. But I think Robbie's certainly more of a specialist in that than I am. So I don't know what you're hearing.
No, I think you're right. It's interestingly compared, it's almost the reverse to crime in some ways, because I think that the setting is less and less important. It's not so much about these sort of big world building exercises, and it's more about a close cast of characters that we can fall in love with and find funny and get frustrated with. It's becoming incredibly sort of, I think that the emotional depth that we're seeing in science fiction and fantasy at the moment is really interesting. There was a great book, Seven Devils, that came out early in the year, I think. That was, yeah, I definitely recommend it. It was good. And then these, yeah, sorry.
No, I interrupted you. You go ahead.
I can't remember quite what I was saying. I was just going to blether on, probably.
Well, I was going to say grounded sci-fi, I feel like editors are asking for, and also our film and TV agents. So things like Sweet Tooth, and we're watching a lot of those things that we maybe should be reading as well. So I know their film and TV people are looking for great IP from books and those kind of settings. I think that's feeding into acquisitions as well.
I work with quite sort of the literary end of science fiction and fantasy writing, and I think we are starting to see that sort of Netflix effect start to break through with editors. Before now, literary editors have been quite averse to, I mean, we had to call it speculative for a start because they didn't want it to be sort of science fiction. But I think they're coming around to it. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more. And, I think, not that it's already been happening with people like Emily St. John Mantell and I can't remember Lauren Bukes and people like that. But I think we're going to see more of it. It's going to be fun. It's an area that I just love.
I'm going out with a sci-fi next year, which I'm definitely sending to literary editors called Speculative.
Oh, I want to hear about it.
Yeah, that's
just to run through a few questions. We've got about 5, 6, 7 minutes left, something like that. So just a couple of kind of, again, a technical question or two. This one to Lena. What do you deem too long for a YA novel? Does a word count limit exist?
Yes, I think it does, but it doesn't have to be maybe a specific word count, because it does depend on genre. I mean, YA, if it's very much geared at teenagers, kind of 60 to 70,000 words is probably kind of standard, but up to 18, 90 can certainly be fine. Like in adult fiction, if you're writing fantasy, you tend to be allowed a bit more scope, 100, maybe even a bit more. Yeah, I wouldn't get too worried. I think if you're over 120,000 words, 110,000 words, there needs to be a really good reason for it. There needs to be something epic happening there, and it needs to have a lot of world building or something. Quite often I feel like it's a very common edit to say that this book needs to cut 20%. Things tend to be better and tighter if you edit it down. If your book is uncommonly long, it might mean that it needs a bit of editing, or that you're writing a really big epic.
Yeah, Robbie, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. Got another question in as well. Anonymous, wondering where we might be in relation to memoir. And I know you both mentioned kind of non-fiction, narrative non-fiction. Where are we with memoir?
There's a question as well from Adam asking about professional confessional memoirs.
Oh, yeah.
If the trend is fading there. So I really like memoir. I think that we went through sort of the misery memoir stage. I think we're going through a bit of a recovery memoir sort of area as well, where we're sort of reading about the sort of the redemption of lost souls. I think maybe it's getting a bit full, and we're going to start looking elsewhere for these stories. But it definitely feels like you need to have you either have to have had something extraordinary happen in your life, or you need to have a pretty good profile, social media profile, or both. Social media, also journalistic profile, or both.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a kind of core theme, even if you're kind of covering your life. It's quite good that it's looking at a theme like recovery or motherhood or loss of a loved one, or something like that. I think just a straightforward, I was born here and this happened to me, that's probably quite tricky.
Well, thank you so much. There's a few questions here which are related specifically to the kind of agent process as well, which I think probably belong a little bit better in the next session, which is about pitching, which does actually contain quite a lot more in that session when we've done it before, actually, about the process of getting representation, what happens after the tweet pitch happens. So I'd really encourage people to kind of sign up for that as well, which as I say, could go into much more detail about the kinds of the mechanical process of that, and perhaps we'll deal with some of those in that time. So just to say kind of a huge thanks to Robbie and Lena. And just to close on one question there, which is about whether you're both open for submissions.
Not at the moment, but I will be in the new year. I just need to get through my submissions pile first.
Yeah, I'm basically in the same position. I have been closed for submissions because I have been on maternity leave, and I just wanted to make sure I was caught up and making sure all my current clients, who are always, my priority, are well looked after. But yeah, in the new year, I will be opening for submission, and certainly if I'm requesting things during the XpoNorth pitch thing, I will want to see them, even if I haven't had a chance to update the website yet.
Yeah, well, look, great. Thanks so much, Lena and Robbie. And just to say, the pitch event is on the 21st of January. And between now and then, we've got the session on the 7th of January that is about the mechanics of pitching. And we do, in that session, go a lot into what happens around that. Not just what's a great tweet pitch, but actually what is working as a pitch now. How do you do this? And also what you can expect in the immediate follow-up if an agent or publisher contacts you, and what you're likely likely to be expected to have available and submit. And it's different in different things. You know, pitching an idea for a non-fiction book or a memoir or something like that, it's very different actually to pitching a novel, and the expectation around those sorts of things is the expectation about the level of preparedness of how finished it is and so on is quite different. So I'd really encourage all those who've asked questions in that kind of area to hook up with us then. Now, all the details of all the things we do are available at XpoNorth.co.uk. And thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in, as they used to say, to this session, and look forward to connecting again in the new year. And a happy Christmas and New Year to everybody, and especially to Lena and Robbie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.